Welcome back for another podcast. In today's podcast, I thought I would talk about work holding. So, a little over a week ago now, I actually got my hands on this little corner vise. This is a Stanley 702, and it's been quite good if I'm honest. I'm quite enjoying it, and I'm finding myself grabbing for it more and more. And the good thing about it is that it is portable. So that's pretty much prompted us today to go through, some of the work holding that I've kind of used over the years, so I'm going to, maybe give a few little demos. So if you're all listening to this, it's probably better if you can maybe switch over to YouTube and maybe watch it. As I say, I will be giving a few demos. So one of the first kind of work holdings that I ever used, and I think most people would use, would be a vise. So one of the very first vices that I used, or the very first vise that I used, was probably an old record. I can't quite remember the name of it. These are quite common during the 80s and 90s, and the first time I used one was when I went to college, back in 98, I want to say, somewhere along that. So quite a long time ago, and yeah, I like vices. They are pretty cool, but I haven't really bothered with them for a long time. And then obviously I come across this little guy. I seen this little guy quite some time ago on a video. I can't remember the video. I can't remember who posted the video. But basically, whoever it was had this. I believe they had this on a Roman workbench, which I'm not against putting vices on a Roman workbench, but I just don't feel it's necessary. Because in between a couple of holdfasts and some pegs and a wedge, you can pretty much do everything. And how I know this is because I've primarily used a low Roman workbench for about 5 years. And some of the furniture I've made dining tables on it. I made dovetail blanket chests on it. You name it, chairs on it. I've done absolutely everything on a Roman workbench, which ironically is just sitting in the corner there behind the camera there. So this is pretty cool. This was a nice little find. I don't need it, but I have to admit, since I've got it, I have been grabbing for it and using it. It is super handy. I did have to take a little bit of a twist out of one of the jaws. So I did actually do a very quick video. If you want to watch that, it'll be in my videos if you want to click on my videos and have a watch of that. So one of the things I do like about this is that the 702, it is actually a movable vise, which it's really good in the sense that I can take this and put it anywhere on my workbench, within reason of course. And I can also take it to a job site if I'm going to do some work at somebody's house, which was kind of the first thing that popped into my mind when I did say it last week. I thought that'll be really good. I can take that, somewhere. There has been a few people over social media that said it would be great just to pop onto a sawhorse, which again, yeah, would definitely be excellent. So if you pop that onto a sawhorse, obviously you're going to be able to grab the likes of like a door. If you're hanging a door, this is going to be like really good for hanging a door. I think just for general purpose, it is a good little thing. My only gripe with it is that on the underside of it, it has got a couple of I don't know what you would class those as, kind of like protruding ridges. And what these are for, what I'm guessing they're for anyway, is that they actually dig into the tabletop or the material, and they basically, it stops it, when you're using the vise, it's just going to stop the vise from sliding, like pivoting type of thing. The same way a workpiece would do if you are using a single clamp, the workpiece will tend to pivot. same sort of thing. So I think to alleviate this, they put these ridges in, so there's actually like 3 ridges, and it does actually mark your workbench. So again, a way around this, you could obviously, you know, just mount this onto a piece of wood or use a piece of wood. Obviously you'd have to make sure the piece of wood is pretty secure, but it is quite a good little thing. And if you can get your hands on one, and you can get your hands on one cheaply, I would definitely recommend you get one. I can definitely see myself using this quite often, and I have started to use it often. I think the next thing I started using was probably wedges. That was when I started messing around with, you know, kind of the low Roman workbench. So the wedges are pretty cool, the pegs and wedges, and I think it's probably one of the easiest and most cost-effective ways for someone to start to get into woodworking, basically using a Roman workbench. So the good thing about the wedges, what I like, you just make them, you don't have to go out and buy anything, which is pretty cool. One of the things I like so much about these is that everything just tends to be, you know, so simple. So basically the majority of the work, when you hold them with these, it tends to be with 3 pegs. So you're using one of the pegs to basically use a wedge. So if we get a couple of pieces of scrap, and we give this a little tap, and that's the workpiece locked in. So this is what you can see on camera. This is typically how I would plane if I was using the low workbench. This is how I would plane, you know, if I was edge planing for, I don't know, if I was joining some boards, if I was going to glue some boards up. So as you can see, it does hold it solid. One thing you do have to watch out for is that whichever way you're planing, you do have to make sure that the wedge is pointing in that direction. So see if I can demonstrate this. So I've got me canner here, and the way I've put the wedge in, I've put the wedge in for a Western style Bailey's pattern, planer number 4. So the wedge is actually pointing this way, so when I'm planing, this should come out, it should. So because I am pulling, and obviously I'm pulling in the opposite direction where the wedge is wedging itself in, so this should come loose, should. No, it's not coming loose, but typically it will come loose. And basically because you're pulling this against or towards the fat end of the wedge, it just will come loose over time. So you do have to bear that in mind. Another thing as well, if you're using like a free wedge system like this, it's not very good for like an upward force type of thing. So you might have this at the edge of a bench, and you might be using, you know, kind of a ryoba. So you might have it to the edge of the bench, and you might be cutting, for argument's sake, you're cutting a tenons. So what you do have to be careful about with that is for a pivot to happen. So this has actually happened to myself. It happened to myself while I was, what was I doing? I can't quite remember what I was doing, but what I do know was I think it was a 3x3 lump of oak, somewhere about that size. So it was quite a hefty piece of oak. And as I'm down on my knees and I'm sore, and this was outside on my Roman workbench, and one or more of the teeth grabbed the grain, and as I yanked it down, obviously the whole thing just pivoted and, and smacked us in the forehead. And I kind of stood up and I stumbled around the garden. I don't know how I didn't knock myself out, but I was dazed and I was like, you know, kind of stumbling around the garden, like. So I don't think anyone's seen us, like, so they would have had a good laugh if they had seen us anyway. So yeah, you do have to be careful, you know, with that type of work holding. So I had been using the kind of wedges, the wedge and peg system for quite a long time, and I do still use it. If I'm using the Roman workbench, I use it. You know, it's second nature to us to use the wedge and peg system on a Roman workbench. But I do still use it sometimes on the tall workbench, not necessarily for clamping. What I do tend to use it for is for sawing. So a lot of the time, and this is just because I do use pretty much all the time. It's very rare I use a Western style saw. Now, not that I dislike them, it's just this is my preference and it has been for quite a few years now. But I do tend to use a peg, so I'll put a peg on a corner and I don't know, whatever I may be cutting. I may be cutting a haunch on a tenant, or I might be cutting the shoulders of the edge of, you know, multiple dovetails. And what I will do, I'll clamp it with my hand, so with me fingers and my thumb to the back. You know, so once you've got a clamping into position, you know, it ain't going anywhere. Sometimes this can twist a little bit. It depends. It depends on the grain of the wood and stuff like that. But you know, I can and do use a mat sometimes, a rubber mat. But as I said, I use this quite a lot. But I don't tend to use a wedge with stuff like this. Although it can still be done. So I had been messing around with the wedges and the pegs for quite some time, primarily, well, 100% on the Roman workbench, and then I did get myself a hold fast. So for those of you that have never used a hold fast, they're appropriately named because it will hold your work and they'll hold it quite fast. So the caveat with these is that you do have to have some meat on your bench. So I personally think, and I have tested this to a degree, is that you should be looking at somewhere in the region of 2 inches minimum of thickness. You know, you may be able to get out to 45 millimeters. But you're typically looking at about 50, you know, a minimum of 50 millimeters, which is 2 inches. So the issue with these hold fasts is that if you're going to use them on something like this, so this bench top is actually 22 millimeters in thickness, and I did hum and haw about this when I actually designed this bench and I built this bench. It was one of the considerations that, you know, I did hum and haw about, because I do like hold fast, because once you get accustomed to using them and you understand how they work and so on and so forth, you will be able to hold your work really quickly, efficiently. So the issue is that because the thickness of this bench is only 22 millimeters, it will actually loosen up on the workpiece, because there's not enough material for these to bind. So basically, again, for anyone that doesn't know how these work, is that when you've got the material underneath and you start applying pressure or blows rather with a mallet, what happens to the shaft itself is the shaft will actually skew. So when you're hitting it, and it jams itself into the piece. So if you can imagine, 22mm isn't really a lot of material to jam itself. So this is why these are typically found in thicker benches of maybe like 3-4 inches, and they do work a lot better in the thicker benches. But me personally, I find that you can get away with 2 inches. 2 inches is fine, and you will get a good bite with them. But as I said, unfortunately, you know, with this bench, it was one of the caveats I had with it. Obviously this bench has worked out really well. It's worked out a lot better than I thought it was going to. It stood up very well, but that was one of the caveats. So leading from that, one of the things that I did say, well, instead of having a hold fast, what I can do is that I can actually use some sort of clamps like this. So these are basically T-track clamps or tracksaw clamps, and I have to admit I actually do like using them, not necessarily in this like this, but just in general use. I do like to use them. So to look at them, they do actually look a little bit flimsy. You know, I had seen them multiple times on videos, and I did notice that, or at least what I was seeing at the time, I was seeing a lot of Japanese craftspeople actually using them to hold the, you know, the pieces in place, or all holding kind of the guide pieces. So again, for those of you that don't know, a lot of Japanese joints do rely on being like 100% square. So what you'll often see is a piece of scrap material that's like straight, so it's at 90 degrees, and they will put it onto the workpiece, clamp this on the workpiece, and use it as a guide for the chisels, you know, so maybe for some type of shoulder, some type of, you know, complex joint that they're making. So I did see a lot of that. Ironically, I haven't seen any lately, but in the past I have seen a lot of it. So I did think to myself, they must be pretty decent, you know, they must be able to hold a piece of material in place for them craftspeople to use them. Otherwise they wouldn't be using it. So I did actually purchase some. I own 4 of these now. So I've got the regular you know, screw handle ones, and then I've got the kind of the ratchet type ones. So these are really good for holding, for what they are, they're really good for holding material, and I would definitely recommend, you know, if you're looking for some type of new clamps, don't dismiss these, like give them a visit. I cannot remember, I think it might have been £30 for 2 of these, or maybe £25, I can't quite remember, but they are good. So I digress. So basically, in place of the hold fasts, I said to myself, I'll start using these. So they do actually do a great job, but the only problem is they can be a little bit faffy. So sometimes if I am wanting to, you know, maybe put a piece of material in there, so I have got to get it. So that didn't actually take us too long, you know, but if it had been a hold fast, it would have been in, bang, and it would have been done. It would have been done like 2-3 times quicker. And sometimes these can be faffy. I'm not going to turn the bench around, but I did actually start using these with the apron section. So on the other side of the bench, for those of you that haven't watched any of my work, I have actually got an apron side on this side of the bench, and that's got a lot of dog holes running the full length. So again, what I can do, I can actually put these clamps in and clamp stuff up. The problem with that is it tends to be a two-handed operation, and it's a problem because you kind of need free hands if you're going to use two with a clamp and you're trying to hold a workpiece. You know, maybe you're cutting a tenant, you physically got to hold it, you know, and what I tend to do, I try to use my knee or my hip and, you know, try to get into place. So that's one of the caveats with using these on the apron side. But I think where they do shine, at least the shine for me, is that they're absolutely great just to clamp things down to the side like so, the edge of the bench. So I really like them like this, and this is one of my preferred methods of using clamps. So I personally think these do a better job of holding things into place than the likes of these styles of clamp. I personally feel these styles of clamp, you kind of get enough torque with them, where these, I think you get ample. Another thing I like about these types of clamps to hold the workpiece in place is that the footprint on top is it's very small. So if you compare on a regular type of clamp like this, which is really common, they're big, they're bulky, and they can get in the way. So obviously on camera you can see how bulky it is. I take it away and then you've got this small little sleek thing. The only thing I will say about these is that if you're not watching what you're doing, they will leave some indentation in your workpiece. So a way you can get around this is that you just put some sort of material on it, whether it be some leather or some cork, something like that. Or you can do what I normally do, depending on how I'm using it. If it doesn't, you know, if the top's not going to get in the way, I'll just have it reverse, and any indentation will go on the underside of the bench. Another work holding method that I really like, and it often gets looked over by other woodworkers, is a rubber mat. So I've been using these kind of styles of rubber mat for a lot of years now, and sometimes it's all you need when you're cutting material. I think a lot of the time, because I'm using the Japanese styles of saw, that do actually, this style of work holding does actually hold out a lot better for us, because let's just say I'm cutting multiple dovetails for a dovetail chest, let's just say. So how I would typically cut a dovetail, obviously multiple dovetails, you know, obviously this is just a thin scrap, but if this was wider, I can imagine this was wider. What I would actually do is just have it on the edge of the bench like so, and just be cutting my dovetails. And I've only got to put a slight amount of pressure onto the bench, and it just stops it from moving. So I also like to do this as well, you know, let's just say I'm cutting off the edge of this board here. You know, so they are quite good. Just to try and show you. So this should move about a little bit. Let's see how much. So you can see it does move about a little bit, and it just tends to be when the grain, or rather the teeth grab the grain, and it will, you know, kind of flick it. So obviously you don't get any of that when you're using a mat. And I am actually, when I've just been cutting this without the mat, I am actually applying more pressure than I would without using the mat. So if you're using a mat, you don't have to apply quite as much pressure, which is really, really good. Another thing that is really good, let's just say we have multiple components to cut, and for whatever reason we do actually need to clamp it. So if I was to use maybe one of these style of clamps, and I can actually get quite a lot of pressure, like clamping pressure on it, I can just put one clamp on, and I don't have to worry about this swiveling at this pivot point, which is a common occurrence if you aren't using any type of mat. So just to show you, there's a big difference, isn't there? So these mats can be absolutely awesome. And the thing that I discovered a lot of years ago is that if you're using one of these mats, and let's just say, I don't know, I'm not even sure what sort of example I could give you, but in the past I have actually used toolboxes, tool caddies to actually hold pieces in conjunction with one of these. So let's just say we are, I don't know, we're using a Western style of saw, and we may be cutting, I don't know, dovetails, maybe a tenant. So what I can do is I can put one of, let's just say I put this on the edge of the table, and because it's on a mat and there's some weight, there's actually some weight on this. This is actually a bit of a bad example, this, but this is better suited for a Roman workbench, because obviously a Roman workbench is lower. And this box, what you should be able to see behind us, is it's actually a Japanese toolbox. So with weight inside of this Japanese toolbox, and what I used to do if I was cutting dovetails, usually outside in the summertime, I would have this on a bench, I would have this on a mat, and basically what I could do, I could actually clamp to the edges of these just with a couple of clamps, and it was like a bit of a make style moxon vise. So you can kind of do the same thing here. So just to kind of give you an example of what I'm talking about here. This isn't a very good example, but what you can do, you can actually put like, you can put something like, I don't know, maybe you're cutting another haunch on a tenant's so you can see just by the weight, just having some weight on top of a mat, it does make a difference. And as I say with the Japanese toolbox, that was when I first started doing like a lot of you know, blanket chests. I did actually make them quite regularly a few years ago. I was selling them on Etsy. I've since stopped. But that was the kind of go-to for holding the material when it was lovely and hot outside, and I would just be out there for hours and hours, and I never had any issues, you know, clamping the material to the box as long as it was on a mat. You know, couldn't fault it. So that is a really good way to hold your work. I am actually curious, do any of you guys use any of the methods that I've shown? More specifically, the less known ones, or at least what appears to me to be less known. I'd be curious to know if you use any, you know, the mat, or you use anything with a toolbox, fix into a toolbox, anything like that, or indeed just how your workflow goes. Basically, how do you normally fix to the top of your bench, or, you know, to your aprons? Do you use vices? Do you use holdfasts? I would be interested to know. If you leave a comment, it would be most appreciated. So I'm going to leave it there, guys. I think I've rambled on enough today. So as always, I always appreciate you guys watching, and until the next time, I shall see and speak to you guys later.